Well, greetings, children. Welcome back. Last time we talked about some of the Roman origin stories, and today we're going to talk about the actual origins of Rome. The story of Romulus and Remus, story of the Aeneid, probably have one thing in common. They probably both never really happened. But today we'll talk about what we know from archaeological and other written accounts actually happened in the foundation of Rome, a little taste of what their government was like, and the story of one of my favorite famous Roman figures, and that is the quasi-legendary Cincinnatus. So that's what's on board today. The letters on the screen, SPQR, was an acronym that you would see all over Rome. And of course, it's Latin, and I won't even attempt the Latin translation for you this late in the evening, but it stood for Senate and People of Rome. And you saw this acronym everywhere. It was carved in marble on monuments and in public buildings. It was emblazoned on any sort of legal document, and the legionnaires of the Roman military would actually tattoo it on their arms. SPQR, the Senate and People of Rome. And it is interesting. Rome did not pledge allegiance to a flag, to one man, an emperor. They would eventually, but not at first. They instead pledged it to the Senate and People of Rome, because that is what Rome was, the Senate and people, or a republic. According to tradition, Rome had kings, because just about every place starts with a king, one strong man, one person in charge. But by 509, the last of the Etruscan kings were driven out, and Rome founds a republic. Now, we live in a republic. We live in a very democratic republic. This is not the direct democracy of the Greeks. To say Rome is a democracy is not quite fair. A republic is a government where the people choose the officials, and then the officials govern on their behalf. But the Roman Republic was not particularly democratic for a number of reasons. First of all, the major lawmaking body was the Senate, and that was made up of 300 senators who received lifelong appointments. The thing about the Senate is that the only people who were eligible to be senators were a very small minority of the population, the rich, landowning, landed upper class. And so these people would control power, and they were legionnaire, and they were the legionaries, more on that in a second, but they was not accessible to the poor. And even if you became rich, if you did not have that noble name for a long time, you could not move your way up into that patrician class. So the people who truly had power in Rome for most of Republican history come exclusively from the blue blood upper class, and there's no way to change that. That's not particularly democratic, even if the people do have a say in who becomes those senators. I mentioned the legionaries and Rome's armies. We'll talk about this more when we talk about the Punic Wars against Hannibal. Rome's armies were some of the greatest that Western Europe had ever seen. But the Roman legions were very interesting in that the only people who could make up the legionaries, the only people who could be soldiers in the Roman military, were the upper class, or the very minimum people who owned land. If you were poor, if you were not a landowner, you were forbidden to be a soldier in the Roman legions. Now think about that. Our army today is disproportionately made up of people from the working class. And you see very few, not entirely none, but you see very few people from the wealthiest classes wanting to enroll in our volunteer military. In Rome, it was the opposite. You, if you're part of the upper class, you absolutely would do military service. In fact, if you wanted to serve in the Senate, if you wanted to have any positions in government, military service was mandatory. So everybody serving in the Roman Republican Senate or the quaestors or the other parts of the Roman government, they had done time as legionaries in the Roman army. And these weren't cushy peacetime jobs. They probably were fighting with sword and shield in the thick of it. And when you have a government made up entirely of veterans, as we would call them today, I think that gives you a different sort of mindset on how and when to use your soldiers, and you maybe do it a little more judiciously. And Rome's government and military, they have a little more cohesion, at least in the early Republican era, than you see in other places, possibly because of that. Um, Another important part of Rome was the idea of the patron system. If you were a rich person, remember, in Rome, your honor and status is more important than money. In the United States in 2020, the most important thing is money. You do things to get money, and money gives you status. In Rome, money was not the goal. The goal was status, and you needed money to buy status. And the way you could do that is you could have something called the patron system engaged. So, say I'm a rich senator. What I might do is I might financially support the sort of working class people around me. I might buy from the local farmers. I might pay the local tradesmen to be my Fletcher, to be my cobbler, to be my blacksmith, or however it might be. I might give the equivalent of a scholarship in the sense that I would pay for a promising young kid. I would pay for his schooling. And in return, those families that I was supporting, they would vote for me. And in more extreme cases, later in the Roman Republican history, they would take to the streets and they would march and they'd demonstrate, and sometimes they'd even fight as a mob on my behalf. And that was the idea of this patron system. Remember, the key difference, I keep saying this, so you know you're going to see it on the test here. In Rome, money is not the object, honor is the object. And you use your money to buy the honor and reputation. That's the opposite of the United States today, where for most people, money is the object. And once you get the money, the honor comes with it, the reputation comes with it. So it's kind of backwards. Do be aware of that in the Roman system. Okay. The patricians are the upper class landowning, about 10% of the population. The vast majority of the population, the bulk, are plebeians. And they're your farmers, merchants, artisans, traders, soldiers. But they are not necessarily poor. This is essential. You could be a really rich plebeian, but if you didn't have that blue blood, you weren't allowed in government positions. Now, a lot of plebeians were also dirt poor. Rome has poverty from day one till the day Rome falls. But plebeian was a social status not 100% tied to wealth. Again, different from the United States. Our classes are based on wealth. It doesn't matter really who your parents were. If you have a famous name, that's irrelevant. It's more about wealth. In Rome, what your lineage was mattered much more. Now, for most of Roman Republican history, the plebeians are banned from the Senate, but eventually they were allowed to send a representative. The representative was not allowed to propose legislation in the Senate. The representative was not allowed to vote in anything the Senate voted on. The representative was not allowed to even speak in the Senate except to utter one word. In English, it is I forbid, and in Latin, it is veto, veto. And if the tribune yelled veto, if the plebeian official called the tribune yelled veto, the Senate had to shut down for the day. And what this did was it would give the plebeians a little bit of power in the Senate so they weren't completely walked over. People like to say that American politics is in 2020 is backstabbing and cutthroat. And luckily, so far, it has not been. In Rome, however, that was a real possibility. Sometimes what the senators would do is they would pay mobs to physically attack the tribune so he could not get to the Senate to veto legislation. Consequently, the plebeians would form mobs to fight those mobs. And there would be street fighting where the tribune would be like a human football. They were trying to battle their way through the streets to get him to the Senate to yell veto to stop whatever this law they wanted to get on or off the books was. I almost said questions so far, but you're not really here. I'm talking to myself like a crazy person. Okay. The last thing I want to mention is that one problem with a senatorial system is that it's slow, it's clunky. There's a lot of voices. You sometimes can't get things done quickly. In peacetime, that's fine. In moments of crisis, that can be problematic. And so Rome had a mechanism to deal with that, and that was called the dictatorship. If there was a catastrophe, a natural disaster, more often a war, the Senate could temporarily abdicate power to one man, and that one man would have complete tyrannical, authoritarian, dictatorial power over the entire mechanism of the Roman government and military. And then that man, when the crisis was over, would abdicate his power back to the Senate. That seems like a dangerous precedent. But there is a legendary Roman hero, and we do believe he was a real person, who set the standard for how a dictator should act. And his name was Cincinnatus. As the story goes, the early republic was fighting for control of Italy, and they were getting their butts handed to them by an old enemy, the Etruscans. And so the Senate decided to give power to one man. And they decided the man they wanted to give power to was an old retired general named Cincinnatus. Cincinnatus had long since retired to his Roman latifundia, kind of like a plantation. But he gets the call from his people, his senators saying, we need you one more time. And Cincinnatus reluctantly leaves his fields and his plow and his family behind. And he puts on the old armor and he marches off to war. And as the story goes, in only 15 days, Cincinnatus, being such a marvelous military leader, in only 15 days, he eradicates the Etruscan threat. He wins glory and honor for Rome. They want to throw him a triumph, which is this huge party back in Rome. And some people even want Cincinnatus to keep the power. He's so beloved. He's so respected. He has all the dignitas a Roman man could ever hope to have. And what does Cincinnatus do with the entirety of Rome in the palm of his hand? Cincinnatus, the perfect Roman, he gives the power back to the people. SPQR. He gives it back to the Senate and people of Rome. Cincinnatus is so beloved. He's so worshipped. He's like quasi-legendary. He was what every Roman wanted to be. He was the gold standard that every Roman aspired to be so beloved, to have all the power and love and respect and honor and dignitas in the world and give it back. And he retires back to his farm and lives out the rest of his life in peace, happiness, and comfort, knowing he has served his country, his Senate, his people with everything he has, and then given that back to keep the republic strong. There is a parallel in history to Cincinnatus, and one we are quite familiar with. Someone who we venerate, who is beloved by Americans of all stripes. And that is, of course, our first president, General George Washington. Washington also was an incredibly beloved general. Washington won his war, the Revolutionary War. Washington went back to his plantation, Mount Vernon. And then Washington's country said, George, we need you again. And Washington became our first president. And some people wanted George Washington to be king of the United States. Washington, who had the American people in the palm of his hand, said, idiots, we just fought a war to not have a king. Of course, I will not be your king. And after he serves 2 terms as president, even though he easily could have been elected to a 3rd term, even though there was no law in the books that says he couldn't be elected to a 3rd term, Washington says, no, I give the power back to the people. And he retires to live out the rest of his life on his latifundia, his plantation, for the rest of his days in peace and comfort and honor and happiness. And because of the parallels between Cincinnatus, and yes, that is what Cincinnati is named after, this guy Cincinnatus, Cincinnati, Ohio. Because of the parallels between Washington and Cincinnatus, one of my favorite statues exists in the American Museum of Art in Washington, D.C. And if you go there, you will find this thing. It is 30 feet tall, and it is called American Cincinnatus. And there is George Washington, and he is dressed in a toga in the Roman style. And you see he has this sword, and he's giving the sword back to the people. He's returning power back to the people of Rome. Also, if you look, Washington apparently a P90X user, because Washington is pretty cut in this sculpture, I'm not going to lie. I don't know if George really looked that good, but if he did, he's even cooler than I thought he was in the first place. American Cincinnatus. You should see that. Okay. Washington. The American Cincinnatus is inspired by the actual Cincinnatus. Rome's republic, though, will be put to the test when it will see military loss after loss after loss compound under the unrelenting assault of a quote unquote barbarian general. This will occur in a conflict we call the Punic War, and the general will be the legendary Hannibal. But let's make that our story for another